Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this bonus episode of the Film Realist Podcast. My name is Kyle Naranya. Welcome to my spoiler-free Andor Season 2 thoughts. I have seen all 12 episodes, and episodes 1, 2, and 3 are going to be available today when you listen to this live, or if you choose to listen to it later. There's no need to worry. Nothing in this episode is going to ruin the next 4 weeks of arguably the best Star Wars story ever told. So let's jump into my non-spoiler thoughts for Andor Season 2.
If I die tonight, was it worth it? You've done this before. You must have thought about it.
This makes it worth it. This. Right now. Being with you, being here at the moment you step into the circle. Look at me. You made this decision long ago. The Empire cannot win.
Andor Season 2 is a special show based on the way that they're choosing to tell this story. What's most interesting is, unlike the first season, which happened for the most part chronologically with some flashbacks, Andor Season 2 is 4 movies, for lack of a better description, and each episode specifically focuses on a significant event that is going to be important to the larger story. It's a really interesting way of moving time forward without us feeling like we've missed a lot of necessary information. It's the complete antithesis of the final season of Game of Thrones, which felt very rushed and like we were missing things. Each set of episodes establishes something significant to the galaxy, to the Galactic Empire, as well as the Rebellion. And I absolutely loved this method of storytelling where we are focusing on 4 major specific events, and each of those stories comes to a conclusion with enough of an open-ended continuation into the next batch of episodes. What Tony Gilroy and the team do in this season is astounding. This is going to sound hyperbolic, but after watching the final season of Andor, Tony Gilroy and everybody involved from Rogue One and the 2 seasons of Andor have delivered the most mature and compelling story we will likely ever have from the Star Wars universe. Outside of the original trilogy, Andor and Rogue One is the best story ever told. And I do not say that lightly. I am somebody who absolutely adores Star Wars Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and have enjoyed the exploration of the more funky aspects of the Force in the Star Wars universe. And to get an exploration of the maturity within the Star Wars world, getting to know the nitty-gritty elements of building the Empire, as well as the emotional toll on their own psyche and their relationships, dealing with post-traumatic stress in an actual war. That's one of the elements that gets really forgotten when talking about the more adult aspects of the Star Wars universe, specifically with the Rebellion fighting against a galactic empire. The emotional stakes that sets for our major characters, specifically focusing on Andor, somebody who is just a guy. We know he is from the middle of nowhere, as is established with the beginning of the first episode of this series, and setting up the prequel to build to the culmination of Rogue One. And of course, we know, similar to some other major stories in the Star Wars universe, it ends with tragedy. Having the Force be removed from this story, but it's still feeling unequivocally Star Wars, is what's so special about the approach from the creative team in this universe. With Rogue One and Andor Seasons 1 and 2, we have Star Wars better than it has ever been. There's a reason why in the marketing for the first season and now into season 2, they are telling us that we understand the significance of this show, the prestige that Disney Plus has been looking for in the Marvel universe, and you could argue they've approached that with Daredevil Born Again, specifically going into season 2, as I've talked about with Rob and Kofi. But Andor was the touchstone for what every Star Wars show should be achieving or aiming to achieve. And that's not to say you can't have mature and compelling stories in animation. We've had those already. But to have a show in the Star Wars universe that can stand the testament of time and go to toe with your other Last of Us, your Penguins, your Game of Thrones. Star Wars now has that show, and it's not just, look, it's Star Wars and it's expensive. It is the execution in every facet of filmmaking on the television spectacle that makes this one of the best sci-fi stories ever told. When you are looking at something from the grassroots level, unlike the sci fantasy that Star Wars is, where you have the magic of the Force and good versus evil, we see all of the aspects, the different sides of the coin when exploring a birthing of a rebellion. The emotional stakes that it has specifically on our three main leads, that being Mon Mothma, Luthen, and Cassian, as well as our supporting cast, and where season 2 takes it in really establishing the stakes have never been higher, with the rebellion growing and likely now able to be a unified force against the Emperor to save everyone from what has been nearly 20 years of this death grip on society, the potential of a Death Star, what that could mean for galactic control, and the politics being explored in a way that is so somewhat reminiscent of the prequel trilogy, but this perspective, looking at the day-to-day and seeing all of the different rungs in the ladder that make the Galactic Empire, and seeing how the cogs in the machine, when they fail or when they have success, which wheels need to be greased in order for these machines to maintain their function from a metaphorical standpoint. It is absolutely enthralling, and I was captivated from the first set of 3 episodes, which, when you're listening to this, if you listen to this episode day of release, it's shocking to see Star Wars again through this lens, where this is not to be overly critical of the other Star Wars stuff we've had. The exploration has typically meant to be more applicable to children, and that is the case. Star Wars was a franchise that was birthed because of the fantasy elements that children were drawn to. But Andor is your grown-up Star Wars show. And let me tell you that the maturity that this show explores, more than anything, was jaw-dropping. The performances that we get from our main cast are some of the best performances, if not the best performances, we've ever had in Star Wars. Diego Luna as Cassian Andor is the most compelling lead we've had because he is somebody who starts from nothing and becomes such an important figure in the rebellion. And we know where he goes on to with Rogue One, the significance of him in the larger Skywalker saga is somebody that had to have his story told. And getting the perspective also from somebody who was within the Empire at the same time with Cyril Karn just establishes how grand and vast the Star Wars universe is. And of course, we've had such a focus on Force users more than anything, but seeing parts of the Star Wars universe that really kind of keep the whole thing together, that being the political control and how all of the interpersonal dynamics work within the Galactic Empire, and seeing that on the flip side within the rebellion, funding the thing, having public faces at the same time as performing these revolutionary acts to undermine the Galactic Empire, whether that be stealing funds, money, or whatnot, and seeing how a bunch of random squads throughout the galaxy start to assemble and become a unified force for good of the galaxy. Each of these episode arcs that you are going to get as the next 4 weeks deliver solidify for me that the most intrinsic exploration of the Star Wars universe, specifically that of the rebellion versus the Galactic Empire, will never be this good. And it's sad to say, in some respect, that the exploration of the Star Wars universe, which some would argue this has been done to some degree in the expanded universe prior to the recanoning when Disney purchased Star Wars back in 2012. But Dan Gilroy, Tony Gilroy, everybody else involved with this Rogue One universe of Star Wars delivers the most fascinating and in-depth stories we've ever seen. And the benefit of having 2 12-episode seasons allows for there to be time to breathe, and the tension you feel as you know we are approaching the assembly of the Death Star because of Rogue One being the third chapter in this story makes for such a gratifying exploration of the Star Wars universe, and it's the most significant event from the most insignificant characters, but given the light of day that they really deserve. I loved this season of the show. This is non-spoilers, and there is a lot I cannot talk about, but if you are on the fence about watching anything Star Wars because there have been so many shows with the launch of Disney Plus since 2019, if you somehow have skipped Andor, you absolutely need to watch Andor Season 1, Andor Season 2 as it starts releasing today, and then conclude that story with Rogue One. It is not hyperbolic, in my opinion, to say outside of the original trilogy of Star Wars, Andor Season 1, Andor Season 2, and Rogue One is the second best trilogy and maybe the most impactful story in the Star Wars universe ever. Let me know what you think of the first 3 episodes of the season when they drop tonight. I look forward on exploring the season as a whole after it releases its 4th final arc in just a short couple amount of weeks. Thanks so much for listening to this special bonus episode of the Film Realist Podcast. I absolutely love this show. I don't know if you can tell, and I'm really looking forward to talking about all of the spoilers and the reveals as the season is released. Can't wait for that. And don't forget that next week's episode of the official podcast will be a review of The Accountant #2. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.